Cool. Welcome, everyone. So we have about, I think, 30 minutes, 40 minutes to really deep dive into the topics of BioDAOs and how they work. I think it'd be great maybe towards the second half also to include all of you guys if you have questions about BioDAOs. But maybe first to get started, you all just met me and I gave a brief introduction about myself. But yeah, would love to introduce Laura Minquini, Patrick Joyce, Max Unfried, and Albert Annes. Laura, why don't you get started and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this BioDAO journey?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to Sora Ventures for having me here at the Sora Summit and being here with my DeSci family. My name is Sora Ventures, and I'm the core lead of AthenaDAO. We are the decentralized science community focused on funding women's health research, education, and access. So most people don't know this. I didn't know this 2 years ago, but women's health research is massively overlooked, and that to me is crazy because we make half of the world's population. And you actually need women to make the other half. So it's insane that only 10% of government funding goes into researching female-specific conditions. And I actually got into decentralized science from my passion for longevity. In Clubhouse, I remember meeting Tyler, your co-founder, when VitaDAO was launching. So I'm a VitaDAO alumni. I actually started my journey in DeSci with VitaDAO. I became a contributor. And over time, as I learned more about reproductive longevity, I remember sending the email to Paul and Tyler saying, I think we should do a DAO focused on this. Then I emceed DeSci Berlin, met other amazing women in Web3 and said, yeah, we can do this. And timing is everything because you were launching BioXYZ. So we were very fortunate to be just at the right time with what you were doing and then getting on a full-on DeSci journey.
Yeah, I fondly remember that. That was the first DeSci Berlin that we hosted, I think, over a year ago?
Yeah.
Like 1.5 years ago?
May of last year.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's also where I met, actually Albert, I met in an online poker chat room that was hosted by VitaDAO at the time. And I think you started telling me about synthetic, thank you so much, Laura. You started telling me about, asking me about synthetic biology there. I think it was a Sunday and I was like, let's play poker. But then, yeah, we got talking. Albert. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So my name is Albert Annes, originally from Sweden. I have a background in synthetic biology, and the thing with synthetic biology is it makes you realize that biotechnology is much more than a science that can be used to treat disease or diagnose disease, for example. It's a climate technology. If you look at cells, microorganisms like yeast, like bacteria, like fungi, these are the most abundant organisms in the world, and they've evolved over 4 billion years to do amazing things on a genetic level. And you can look at these as factories, as atomic factories. So if computers are the factories of bits, cells are the factories of atoms. So you can manufacture things on a nanoscale, and you can program these cells to produce all kinds of biomaterials, fuels, energy, foods. Maybe you've seen like lab-grown meat, for example. So these technologies can really replace the existing unsustainable, polluting materials that we have today. So yeah, why did I set out to create ValleyDAO? So innovating in this field is really difficult. It's a pure multidisciplinary effort. There is no blueprint for this. There is no Peter Thiel in this field that have written like a masterclass book on how to exactly go from 0 to 1. Everybody is still figuring things out. And what I found fascinating is the DAO mechanism that can very efficiently aggregate talent, funding, knowledge, and different kinds of resources to innovate much faster. So that's what we're trying to do with ValleyDAO, is to create this highly incentivized community, tokenizing contributions towards funding innovations, and then ultimately bringing that to the market. And how I got into DeSci, partially through our little online poker game in GatherTown. But before that, it was actually at a bar, at a conference. Somebody was telling me, hey, we were talking about crypto, because I think Solana was like at $200 at this time, and everybody was going crazy. And somebody mentioned that there are people doing biology in blockchain. I was like, oh, this is super interesting. So I went into a bunch of Discords and quickly immersed myself into the different kind of activities that were going on, and ended up writing a long message like, hey, I want to do this thing, and then things started aggregating and turned into what it is today. And I think at some point you guys came into the Discord and like, hey, we want to fund this, we want to help you get this off the ground. So that kicked things off to the next level.
I often, when I speak to Albert, I assume some of you have maybe seen the movie Avatar, and they have glow-in-the-dark plants and it's very futuristic. One of the coolest applications, so I'm a big gardener and plant fan, and one of the coolest applications that I've always thought of would be if we were able to replace our street lights, for example, with glow-in-the-dark plants. And I think it's really actually amazing to work towards the future that you're working with. Towards synthetic biology is an extremely broad field, and as you said, I think it needs much more collaboration. So excited to dive into that. Max, welcome.
Well, ni hao, Taipei. So I'm actually very happy to be here. Because of this wonderful summit and the focus on DeSci, but what is close to my heart, for me, the first time being in Asia was 8 years ago, and it was actually in Taiwan. I was at the university there in Hsinchu, a little bit south from here. Back then I was still dabbling in the machine learning world. But in 2020 I decided I switched gears a little bit and went into longevity technology and into biotech, trying to figure out what can we do to build novel therapies and therapeutics to halt, slow, or reverse the aging process. And that journey I'm currently still on at the National University in Singapore. So I'm still in Asia, just a different part. And in 2021, I got involved with VitaDAO mainly through one of the projects that VitaDAO funded. It was actually the first one. One of my supervisors, or now supervisors, is Morten Skybye Knudsen at the University of Copenhagen. And he told me about VitaDAO, and I've been dabbling in crypto a little bit before. But for me, it was always, we need to or have to figure out new ways to accelerate longevity research, because the current system, the old system, the traditional system is just not doing a very good job at it. And all this enthusiasm about longevity coming from crypto thought leaders like Vitalik Buterin, Balaji Srinivasan, Brian Armstrong, really thought, okay, this is a cool community, and they are very open-minded, and so the research community should be very open-minded. I think that's, in a way, the sweet spot of VitaDAO, working between crypto and longevity, that longevity people embrace crypto, and crypto people embrace more longevity and learn from each other. And like Paul already mentioned, we fund longevity research. We try to build longevity communities across the globe, just to move healthcare to the next age as well. And in a similar way, what Bitcoin is to finance, longevity biotech is the same to traditional medicine. It's a different approach of, instead of trying to cure symptoms, the diseases, really try to cure the underlying root cause of aging itself as the root cause of disease, instead of fighting this hydra of all those different diseases.
Thank you so much for that. Patrick, I'm curious, how did you first discover about crypto and also kind of put science and crypto together at Research Hub?
Yeah, totally. So I gave a little bit of my background before, but I can just go from the top. I was really lucky when I was an undergrad. I got to do some undergraduate research at Johns Hopkins studying tumor biology, the epigenetics of cancer stem cells. It was a well-funded lab by HHMI, and it was the most intellectually curious experience of my life. There were 30 brilliant people who were just working on what they were passionate about. I was like, this is incredible. I fell in love with bench research, decided to start a PhD, found out that not all labs are quite as awesome as an HHMI-funded lab, and there are a lot of kind of tough things that happen to scientists. Yeah. And so I have plenty of stories there, but after a couple of years, decided that it probably wasn't for me, that success in academia took a lot more than just hard work and intelligence. You kind of have to be lucky too, have a good advisor, be politically connected, lots of things. And so I was I don't know if I want to spend my life doing this. So I dropped out, decided to start medical school, very passionate about mental health and psychiatry. And I got into Georgetown, and Georgetown's great because like in the first week, they very much prioritize getting you into the clinic, talking to patients, like actually starting to do like work as a doctor, not just studying, in a library somewhere. And so I was like, yeah, psychiatry's awesome. I can't wait to get started. And like, again, I found that like sort of the top level impression of medicine is not quite as accurate as like the reality of it. Like a lot of the frontline therapies in psychiatry work well for like 10 to 20% of patients, but for the grand majority of people, they just are not better than a placebo. And so I was like kind of dumb and was like, I don't know if I want to spend my life doing this either, where like, I would get paid a decent amount of money to not necessarily help anybody. And so I was just kind of, I think like stupid and manic and was like, I'll just try and fix this problem. And so I'm a huge fan of Reddit. I'm a big Reddit nerd. Like there's a lot of like very small communities on Reddit that I think people just share advice, just because they're having fun doing it. And so I was like, this like method of kind of like talking about knowledge, like this could be used for science. And like if you could, like incentivize like people to have this type of discussion for academic science, it could work out pretty well. So I was, again, like kind of dumb in retrospect. And I was like, I'll take my student loan money, like my room and board, and spend it on a startup. So I moved back in with my parents, took a year off from school, just started to work on something. And, I was at it for a couple years, like kind of making small progress, ended up getting like a V1 together of like this Reddit for science with a token incentive type of product. And in 2019, Brian Armstrong wrote a blog saying like, hey, academic science is pretty messed up. Like someone should build a Reddit for science with a token incentive. And I was like, hey, Mom, look at this. Like I'm not crazy. And so like I got in contact with Brian. I think, he liked the fact that I had built something. And it was like, hey, let's work together. And so, like, the company that I was at, that I had founded, like, we kind of ran out of money. And then Brian was just like, you should keep working on this thing. Come work on it with me. And I was like, that sounds amazing. And so we've been building Research Hub now for about 3 years. We kind of have, like, a V1.5 out there right now. And with the recent excitement in DeSci, we've actually, like, 10x'd our users over the last month. So we'll see if that sticks around, but yeah, it seems like things are kind of coming together here, so it's been a fun journey.
Awesome, and I see you guys have actually also very actively started working with some of the BioDAOs. Do you want to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there are a lot of really smart, passionate people in the space, and I think what we do at Research Hub is, like, I think do a good job of sort of being, like, the entrance to DeSci, for lack of a better term. We kind of, like, minimize the crypto-iness of things and try and structure like the UX very simplistically so that way you can participate in DeSci without necessarily having to know anything about crypto. And so, yeah, we've had like a couple people from like VitaDAO come in, talk about longevity. Like Vincent is actually a great user who's posted some like novel content via our lab notebook. And so, yeah, I think, we're very lucky to be in a community where I think everyone's trying to solve problems, and are willing to collaborate in a way for everyone to get there together. So it's been a blast so far.
Awesome. Yeah, big shout out to Vincent. If you want to follow someone cool in the DeSci space, go look up Vincent Weiser on Twitter. Big recommend. Cool. So maybe let's start with a personal definition. And it doesn't need to be too long, but like, what is your actual definition of a BioDAO? Open question to whoever wants to take it.
It's bringing biotechnology into the blockchain.
Okay.
Also, I mean, scientific research. It's the interesting thing about the BioDAO is that you're working with researchers, people who are in industry and biotech, and also people who are in Web3. So it's not like a venture fund, for sure. It's also not just a research institute, and it brings so many parts together that I would say that the core thing is biotechnology or scientific research, though.
Maybe in bringing so many different pieces together, where are the biggest opportunities in that, and maybe also where are some of the challenges that you've run into?
I think what you said about running a BioDAO is one of the hardest things you could do. It is. It's because it's not a startup. In a startup, you have a leadership, and then everybody has very specific tasks. In BioDAOs, you count with your contributors. And there's a core team that is there executing every day, but your contributors are so crucial because they are the ones, the researchers, the scientists that come in and evaluate projects. They do it if they're in university, doing their PhD, or as a extra thing for them to do. And to manage all of that, to make sure that you keep them motivated, to also make sure that they feel that they're self-reliant on their own tasks. It's a tricky thing because you have a bit, the same way you would do with apps, you have churn. And making sure that you keep people aligned with the mission and your goals at all times is tricky. It's not a startup. But the other side, the upside of that is that you have incredible contributors come through. People that have very accomplished careers, either in academia or in biotech, who want to give you their time, and you don't have that in startups because that's just not how it operates. So, I mean, everything has its up and its down, but I do think that the DAO is the strongest way to do this because eventually we're going to bring the patient communities, and that's going to be very powerful when they get more involved.
Maybe building on that, what is a core sustainability mechanism, or for lack of a better term, business model or protocol model that some of your DAOs are pursuing? Like, yeah, what has worked and how do you envision it working in the long run?
I mean, let's talk about the legendary flywheel internal meme, but
it's an inside joke.
It's an inside joke, but everybody here knows what a flywheel is. It's like for every iteration of a certain cycle, the system improves, becomes better. And once you start digging into these different BioDAOs, you're going to see a strong similarity in the business models. And the biggest strength of each BioDAO is the intellectual property that they generate through their funding activity. These IP assets could potentially, one of the BioDAOs today could have funded the next billion-dollar technology. And so the goal of this community that is aggregated around this IP is to bring this IP to the market. And if you analyze the process of innovation, it's essentially interactions between people and different levels of trust. And when you have a DAO, you're incentivizing all of these individuals under a common structure, under a common framework, under a common token, for example. So when you're tokenizing this aspect, everybody's working towards that same goal, and that is to progress that IP asset. So, fast forwarding into the future, science takes a long time, but at some point, maybe in the next 3-4 years, these IP assets can actually become either companies that the BioDAO spin out. Maybe they source founders like a CEO and the CSO through the community, which, for example, we've already started doing and have been really successful in that because we have this extensive network and the network of the individuals within the DAO. So there's a lot of branching in the reach. Building companies or sublicensing those IP assets to industry as well. Something else that we've personally, started experimenting with in ValleyDAO is that we recognize that there is the biotech community or the biotech communities, especially in synthetic biology, are very dispersed and they're quite disorganized. The majority of communities are like a Slack channel with like a monthly journal club, and that's it. And usually they're not even active because they have no reason to be. Like there is nothing for those individuals to stay in those communities for. There's no reason. So what we started doing is we've started creating kind of like a community aggregator that brings together people from different communities, opportunities, funding, and so on. And then we're looking to see if there is some way to monetize these interactions through the network and connecting the token to that. So to kind of like create an ecosystem where you can, quite similar to actually to Research Hub, where you can create a bounty for a certain thing that you want to receive or find, and then somebody can earn that bounty by providing that thing to you, whether they make an introduction for you, within their network, or maybe they provide you with some sort of service, and so on. So there is no defined business model for BioDAOs, that's still being defined in a certain way. So people just have to be creative and try things out and experiment.
Maybe I would a little bit add to that by saying, so far there's like no successful DeSci DAO, but I think we're going in the right direction. The reason why I say that is I think there are like probably three things that BioDAOs or DeSci DAOs have to do. We have to show that we can fund research. Check, we've done that, right? VitaDAO did that, ValleyDAO did it, AthenaDAO did that. The second part is, which goes towards Paul said, what's the business model, right? It's like, can we use the projects that we funded? Are they good enough to be spun out into biotechs, right? Into companies that then can grow and really accelerate the research in that field. Check that. We funded, or like we spun out so far one company with VitaDAO, right? But I think where all the sustainability comes
Can you share more about that? Sorry to interrupt.
Sure, 1 second. The third check we need is like, those companies that we spun out, can they bring products, that means therapies to market that do what they're supposed to do, right? That means in the realm of longevity is like therapies that may slow the aging process. With synthetic biology, it probably means do something good for climate or use the technology, or in the case of AthenaDAO, do something for women's health, right? That's something that we still haven't achieved yet, right? And given that biotech is like rather slow, this will take still like a few years, right? I think this entire space is 2.5 years old. I hope that like in the next 5 years we can start a clinical 1 trial for some of those medications, of those drugs, and that would be very fast because usually biotech is slower. If we have like a clinical 1 trial in the next 5 years, that would be fantastic. But even then, there's like still a lot of failure that could happen on the way, right? What I want to say is like BioDAOs, the timeline is different. This is like not a fast pump and dump thing. You have to stay with this like for the next 10, 15 years if you really want it to succeed.
I guess the same was true for Bitcoin.
Correct.
I just want to say something about decentralized science. And I mean, for us, we think that we have a really big opportunity to, in AthenaDAO in particular, onboard the next wave of Web3 users. And that has to be women, because we have the proof in the pudding. When we had our auction, 87 over 110 bids were, a high percentage were women, and they were all tickets under $1,000. So it wasn't the big funders, it wasn't the people that have tons of capital. It's the women that decided, this is a really great way to use my money and to actually get involved into something that I had no idea existed. So with time, education, and obviously a bigger treasury, when the next bull run happens, imagine how many women, female researchers as well, we can get into Web3. And I think that's a massive opportunity, because when I got into crypto, I understood the new asset class, but the NFTs didn't speak to me. And other things didn't speak to me. When I found out this idea of you put capital into this token, it creates a treasury, and then it funds science, and nobody wants to fund, oh my God, this is incredible. So when that clicks to people, it's a very powerful calling card. And I think it shows to people that crypto Web3 has very good use cases, not just the notion of the speculation. We're producing public goods.
Maybe going a little bit further into the model, do any of you want to explain how the governance token is kind of actively being used and how people might perceive its value? Like, how can people really think of these things? Like, what am I getting here? What am I buying? What am I using? Yeah.
Yes, I'd love to take that one.
Yeah.
So at Research Hub, I think we're like a little bit different, where we're kind of more of like a traditional tech company that has a DAO to manage research coin. One of the things that we think about is it's basically impossible for a small group of people to think of the incentives that are actually going to produce high quality scientific behaviors. And more so than like trying to think of things in an a priori fashion in like game theory, how can we reward the best behaviors? We're trying to set up like a democratic kind of way to iterate over time. And so we're really lucky to have the Research Hub Foundation, Jeffrey Corey and Ricardo Goldoni, who are leading that up. And what they do is allow for voting on our reward algorithm. So essentially, if you're part of the Research Hub community, you can have ownership over how tokens are distributed on the platform in a way where the people who invest the most time can have the most say over how tokens are distributed towards the goal of producing healthy research behaviors. And again, like it's like really hard. Like anytime you set an incentive, like people who have malicious intent come in and try and take advantage of it. And so, yeah, our governance token is essentially there to allow our most passionate users to have say over how we reward trying to iterate towards incentivizing healthy research behaviors long term.
What are some of the weirdest behaviors that you've seen?
Oh man, like in a good or bad way?
Can be good and bad. Maybe give me an example in each direction if you feel like it.
Yeah, so like LLM generated content, there are a couple users that are actually like, it's almost like a talent where they're really good at creating content that's like just above the minimum passable bar to be considered allowed on the platform, but really they're just extracting value in the form of tokens. So there's a lot of creativity in the world, you know, when it comes to like extracting value from crypto projects. So like, you know, that's impressive in a frustrating way. And then like in a good way, I think we're very lucky in that like our community is, you know, we're like a very early stage and a bunch of kind of like, you know, in the best way, like geeks and dorks and stuff. And so like the example that I gave in my presentation, Cole, who's just like curious about music and how to grow plants better. And so he just hit me up and was like, hey, like, do you think like I could get some funding for this thing I've been, you know, thinking about and like help to scratch my itch? And yeah, we're just really lucky where we have like a passionate group of people who basically tell us what to build for them, you know? And so, yeah, weirdness in many directions, but we're just trying to bring out more of it.
Maybe one follow-up question. So you mentioned earlier that your community or research code itself is governed by a DAO, and then you mentioned you're a tech company as well. How do you manage like permissionlessness of the platform? And like, is it a permissionless platform? Can anyone post? And like, are the rewards permissionless, or is it really still something that you're actively moderating? Because I know, for example, moderation with Reddit is obviously a huge topic. How are you going about that?
Definitely not fully permissionless in like the traditional blockchain decentralized sense. We like tried to set up the reward structure in a way where like ideally we can take the energy around people who just want to earn tokens and capture it in a good way. It's like really hard though. And we found like the best way to go about it is to have human moderation. And so we have community members who essentially earn tokens to be editors. And their job is to create good content and then also to remove bad content. And in a weird way, this is sort of working. Like Jeff Ricardo and I have stayed up a lot this week, just, you know, laying the ban hammer on bad users. And the best way for them to earn tokens right now is simply just posting papers, because if they create low quality comments, they're immediately banned. And so, like, again, like we're not doing a great job of it, but we've got the early stages of trying to funnel this kind of like extractive behavior towards something beneficial, which in this case is the action of posting papers rather than just like leaving spam comments everywhere.
Max? Yeah.
So with regards like to what you get if you govern the DAO, right? I mean, with VitaDAO, pretty much we have a governance token, and pretty much each on-chain vote deals with how should the treasury be spent on what kind of research projects, right? And the thing is, obviously, it's like we're dealing here with like deep science, and not everybody understands deep science. I mean, even like researchers from parallel scientific fields don't understand the research of other researchers, right? So, so how do you get in a way this wisdom of the crowd that funds good research without like becoming super chaotic? And the way we go about it is like, usually if like we get a research project into our funnel, we have a bunch of like researchers looking over it, we have IP lawyers looking over it that evaluate, hey, what those guys are proposing that should be funded makes sense. There's like enough science to back that up, that this could be like a shot that works. There's like IP that is defensible and that makes sense. And the team also looks solid, right? So it's in a way what people mostly voting on is like a digest, but they also have all the information that this decision is based on, right? So they can look up all the research papers. If they want to be really nerdy and look into everything, they can see how people concluded why this just makes sense.
Talk with the reviewers.
Talk with the reviewers, right? And then ultimately the community is casting a vote of should VitaDAO add or like fund this project or not. And after all, it's then like to the people that have the tokens.
I think there's also going back to, I love the patient side of things or the community, and women's health is very vast. So when people hear we're working women's health research, they wonder, well, what area? We're going through different areas. But I think what's very interesting is now women, and we're experimenting this in our next round of voting for the PCOS and endometriosis session, is if women do so choose to get a badge, potentially we could get quadratic voting on their vote because they have the condition and their vote should matter more in some of these IP because they know what they're feeling, they know their symptoms, and when we explain this is the science we're funding, they can choose to also be part of where the science is going. And this is where we think is going to be a very great utility when you're working on very specific conditions in different areas of research. Where if you know there's the Endometriosis Foundation, there's a lot of the other groups that you can break into the fold that would want to have these governance tokens because they know that they can make impact of where science is going, which is very real. It doesn't happen even in a foundation or academic institute. Regular, everyday people cannot go and say and have a say. And that's where the governance token matters a lot.
Yeah. Governance tokens in DeSci are very different from governance tokens as, well, I know them, or maybe some of you know them. Like for a DeFi protocol, for example, like what are you even voting on, right? You're voting on the emission percentage or the yield or whatever, and the only people who have a direct incentive in those things are the whales, right? So they accumulate tokens to sway the yield towards their, sushi swap pool, or I don't know what it could be, but whereas the rest of the token holders, they have no interest in this. They don't even, so many people don't even understand what this thing is, but in the majority of ValleyDAO token holders or many of the other DeSci projects, they are professionals, like they're researchers, they're entrepreneurs who work in the space, they're investors and so on, and they're much closer to the actual decision making because they can understand the science, they can talk with the reviewers, and actually that treatment or that climate solution is something that directly could affect them. So, the DeSci DAO tokens, they're a reason for people to give a damn about the decision. And I think that's the one of the interesting dynamics if you compare like a DAO token in a DeFi context in comparison to a DeSci context. I don't know if that perspective, really adds any nuance or any value here, but wanted to express that.
I think it's a really interesting perspective. So fundamentally, I think caring about money is one thing, right? But like caring about a cause is a different thing and enacts very different behaviors in people. And this is something that I found really compelling or like really striking in the DeSci space, is that people care a lot more about the underlying governance. And especially if you give the token to scientists, scientists are really going to care if good science is funded or not. Scientists love arguing and discussing. And so I've actually found the implied value of these governance tokens in DeSci to be higher because people care much more about the causes rather than like should we increase or decrease the yield. VitaDAO earlier this year, Max, had a funding round that was led among others by Pfizer. So I think came up as a big surprise to many of us in the DeSci space. Pfizer, I think, got involved in VitaDAO late 2021, so fairly early. Because a lot of the researchers and scientists that they were speaking to, so Pfizer has been doing a foray into longevity as a research field, and a lot of the researchers and scientists that they were speaking to were more interested in speaking to VitaDAO than to Pfizer, which Pfizer found kind of odd, and then was like, well, what's going on here? Max, do you want to maybe, what is Pfizer's interest in potentially holding these governance tokens, and how does that potentially, maybe in your view, tie in with the underlying business model of governing IP, and what it actually means then to govern the IP for a pharma company?
So I think there are like a lot of misconceptions about big pharma, and I had them myself. but we always look at like big pharma as like those large companies that are like doing boring stuff and are very slow. Some of that is true, but they actually also have like digitalization departments, right? And they've been since 20 years, they've been looking into what is happening in the digital world, what assets are being digitalized, how can we keep up with that? And so they looked in the space and they saw the emergence phenomenon of the DAOs, right? And I think what usually helps if somebody in those big pharmas becomes your champion. I think if there's like somebody in there that is already established, but still wants to see big pharma move on as well, right? And incorporate the new cool technologies that are happening outside of big pharma, right? And I think if you have a champion like that in one of those companies, that can make a big difference, right? Because they will rally the troops within pharma for you, which you probably as an individual or as a DAO wouldn't be able to do easily. And obviously then Pfizer got in contact with us and they have like now the VitaDAO tokens, and they've been very helpful in a way that while within the DAO we're like a lot of younger people with like a very juvenile spirit and like think we can change the world, which we will, they in a way bring maybe the daddy energy a little bit to balance that a little bit, and make sure that we're not going fully running in the wrong direction. Say, hey guys, this is where you guys want to go, and this is where we also want you to go. But there's potentially already like a path that you could take that also would lead there. And I think that's very helpful that somehow they guide us in a way, what do we have to develop to actually get to those clinical trials? Because most people within the DAO never brought a drug to market, so it's very helpful for their guidance. And on that note, I think what is interesting is, I think last year we talked with, or this year I talked with Mike from Pfizer, and he said, you know, every year we have all those pharma venture capital firms get together and we all boast what kind of cool clinical trials we're funding, whatnot. And he said, we did that this year. But afterwards, they all came to me and asked me, hey, what's happening in DeSci and what's happening with VitaDAO? So big pharma is like really looking into that space. And probably also for their own gain, right? They want to see what is the cool new crazy science happening that in the future might disrupt their current model of like medicines, right? They're mainly treating symptoms. What we promise, we will treat the root cause. And that's a way bigger industry, right? Because everybody will be aging, and it's like, as of now, like an 8 billion people industry, right? Versus like even all the people who have cancer, it's not that many, but it's a lot of people, but it's not 8 billion people.
Yeah, and I think Pfizer would never be able to do this on their own. The problem with creating a global network of contributors, like if Pfizer was to do that, they would never be able to do it across different companies because they're all competing. In a DAO, there is no, you're only competing with yourself because your ultimate goal is to bring this IP asset to market as fast as possible. So this type of institutional adoption is also like, I think it's in some way like a must for BioDAOs like us that focus on a particular research area, because the infrastructure that industry has, it's going to take a long time for a BioDAO to establish that. Bringing a drug through clinical trials, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of resources that you need. So it makes a lot of sense to partner up with somebody that's going to come downstream of you. In our case, like what we've seen in some of so for example, like we've had a family office that is interested in actually joining our deal flow group, like the group that sources projects, reviews projects, and ultimately makes a recommendation to the DAO to fund this thing. And they want to join this because they want to get into synthetic biology, but they have no idea. Because very few organizations actually have this type of knowledge. And it makes a lot of sense to join forces because you can co-fund projects, you can have a much wider reach, and ultimately you can de-risk the whole pipeline. So yeah, it's quite interesting dynamics that are currently being played out. We don't know how the ultimate configuration will be, but I think so far things are heading in the right direction. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I made a promise earlier as we began this panel that I would take some questions from the audience, and I know that we're coming close on time. Yes, we have a question right in front here.
I have several So I'm Mihaela Uliero from SingularityNet. We are decentralized artificial intelligence, and we have many similar issues with governance. So maybe for Max, I have two questions. One is if you can give us the example of the successful company, which you did not answer when he asked you. And actually, the question is regarding governance. So you mentioned the effect of Pfizer, yeah? So that's the top-down. And then the bottom-up enthusiasm. So how are you actually mitigating that? How are you actually doing that governance? Because we have very similar issues. And, and you mentioned we give token to scientists. So how do you know they are scientists when they buy your token? Because that's another issue which we have, yes. I mean, we're supposed to have scientists and mathematicians on our platform, but actually they are not all of them, and waiting and so on and so forth. So.
Okay, thank you so much. Max?
So part one for the science project, there's like this animal which is called a naked mole rat. It's very ugly looking. It looks like an old man's penis with teeth. But, and they live up to 40 years, which is way longer than every other rodent, right? And they don't get cancer. And some people would make the argument they don't age, right? They don't age. So we're trying to bring those mechanisms from this naked mole rat, this cancer-resistant and non-aging properties, developing that as therapy for humans. So that's quite out there, but I think it's super exciting, it's super fantastic, and Vera Gobanova, a very reputable researcher at the University of Rochester, is working on that with us. The second part was like between the bottom up and top down. I think I wouldn't claim we managed that directly, but Pfizer only has, I think, 500,000 tokens, so they have a minority. They are like
they own less than 0.5%.
Exactly right. So they're like not that strong, right? Not yet. Let's say like that. I'm not sure what their plan is, right? But I think they're like, yeah, we're keeping it decentralized.
Cool. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Yes, Justin.
Thank you for your great talk today. It was I got so much insight. My question is, so I understand decentralizing the process of funding is important for scientific research, but I want to know your take on decentralizing the data supply. For example, for pharma research to develop a new medicine, you need a lot of data from patients and hospitals, but could you really call it decentralized science if the data sources are from the centralized siloed institutions? That's my question.
I think data is
Great question.
tricky.
Laura?
Data is tricky because you have to be compliant, right? So, for instance, in the US, there's a lot of data projects, but in healthcare. But in the US, there's a right to forget. So if you put in the blockchain, it's not going to be forgotten because it's on the blockchain forever. So there's this new CK proof. They're trying to figure out the federated data, all of these things. You bring up a very important point in the sense that when you take research data, it's already published and it's out there in the world. You actually have to centralize some of that data, which you're saying is the opposite direction, but in I can give the women's health research. There's the siloed in startups, and then there's the siloed in academia. And the reality is that we haven't even been able to bring a lot of those data sets together to actually do proper research. So it depends which area of science you're looking at to want to decentralize or centralize. Because right now, some areas of research, like women's health, you need centralization in data, not decentralization. So it doesn't apply for all different areas of research that you have to go decentralize everything because of where the research is or where the investment is and how much it has advanced. With that said, oncology might be a good area to decentralize because it's so big as a industry, and there's so many platforms already running in centralized networks that it would be an interesting use case of what you asked.
I think we probably should stop thinking in absolutes, right? There are things where centralization is good and things where decentralization is good, right? And I think, for example, especially with all this digital technology, right? Like our phones can measure like a lot of things now, and that can be used for decentralized clinical trials, right? Let's assume you take certain drug A, and it starts measuring your sleep and how much you walk, maybe just as a proxy for, do you have more energy now, right? And that can be easily tracked through that, right? Versus like severe diseases where you probably have to be in a hospital, yeah, you probably want to keep that in the hospital where you have like medical stuff there all the time.
Maybe as we wrap up, one last question, like what's your aspiration for DeSci to achieve in the next 10 years, like wildest dreams? Patrick, maybe let's start with you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think probably the easiest answer from our perspective is trying to bring down that number of irreproducibility. So helping to create incentives to create high quality research and then even fund replication studies in order to understand kind of like whether we're actually getting better at producing truth. I think 10 years sounds like a long time, but in science things move slow. So, I'd be pretty happy if we were able to make like a tangible dent in replication.
Okay, fantastic.
I think that's beautiful. That's the really romanticist version of what science should be. I think for VitaDAO, I'm very strict on that. I think the metric that we should aim for, the only metric that claims success, is bringing a therapy to market that reverses aging or like slows aging.
Cool.
Yeah, for us, or DeSci in general, is I would love to see, I don't know what the time horizon for this could be, but at some point, funding and developing a breakthrough technology like CRISPR, for example, and see that governed by a DAO. That would be really cool.
Laura?
The first real pharmaceutical company dedicated to women's health therapeutics. It just doesn't exist. That one that has brought multiple, like a Pfizer, but all for women, female conditions.
Bullish.
Bullish, yeah. It's crazy that doesn't exist. I think you sometimes say there's more funding for like dog research? Or like
Yes, in longevity research, our friend did just how much money has been spent across the board last year. And women, reproductive longevity, which impacts women, is second last. And dogs are before that, which happy for my dog, but bad for my ovaries.
Yeah, so let's change that. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. And give a warm round of applause.